It always snows at Foxcroft. A Very Fatal Christmas by Celia Kay. Episode 1. The Invitation. I cannot say why I accepted the invitation to Foxcroft Hall that Christmas of 1953. Perhaps I was tired of the city's ceaseless clamour. Or perhaps the letter, written in a clean, precise hand and headed with an unfamiliar crest, came at a moment when I was more lonely than usual. The invitation bore no name I recognised, and yet it stirred something. A connection hinted at, but not explained. Too vague to call a memory. The address, simply Foxcroft Hall, Sussex, recalled summer holidays, long ago now, with my aunt in the South Downs. Perhaps that was it. Some old friend of my aunt's had seen my name in the newspaper and felt obliged to offer seasonal cheer. I left London on the 22nd, travelling down to Sussex on the express, an unremarkable journey, peppered with the usual sideways glances, to which I was becoming swiftly impervious. The train drew into Breakhurst station, beneath a slate-coloured sky that threatened heavy snow. The clouds had that queer, pinky-yellow tinge that promised an evening of fat, floating flakes, and a night of crisp, cold silence, where bed-socked feet sought out stone-hot water bottles beneath plump feather eiderdowns. A tiny shiver of anticipation crept along my spine as I suddenly recalled my aunt saying, "It always snows at Foxcroft for Christmas." A man in a black cap and driving coat greeted me on the platform, introducing himself as Sims, the household driver. His accent was local, with a faint twang of old Sussex, and his speech was measured, with the solemn exactness of men accustomed to long silences. Both the car and Sim's livery suggested an estate trapped in the slow, inevitable death started by the Great War and hastened by the Second. I settled myself in the back of the car, carefully avoiding the spring that burst through the faded red upholstery, and gazed out onto the wintry landscape. Sims kept the driver's partition open, but neither of us felt inclined to talk. Even in that down-at-heel vehicle, my battered cardboard suitcase and mismatched vanity, perched on the front seat like a poor relation at a party, sent a scorch of shame searing across my face. What was I thinking, accepting an invitation from strangers, with dresses from 2 seasons ago and makeup from Woolworths? I had been so desperate to escape, I hadn't given a moment's thought to the company I might be keeping. The headed notepaper should have told me. Too late now. We chugged along at a sedate pace, and every turn of a corner tickled my memory of childhood holidays from before the war. Foxcroft Hall. Had we ever been there, my aunt and I? We crested a hill, and there she lay, only the tips of her chimneys showing, twisted red brick columns already white with hoarfrost. The house was tucked into a deep fold in the downs that would clutch ice and snow to its bosom weeks after winter's end, and where the hills beyond crept silently into cloud. The drive snaked downwards through trees whose silvered branches arched overhead like cathedral vaults, until, at last, Foxcroft Hall revealed itself. An elderly Tudor thing, crooked at the corners, with gables that frowned and diamond-paned windows blinking in the uncertain light. Sims insisted on carrying my luggage, such as it was, and led me through the vast front door. A huge, ancient slab of oak, propped open by a giant stone head, Medusa, or some other gorgon, with dubious hair. The great hall was bedecked with holly and seasonal greenery, and a fire glowed in the grate, casting long shadows across the oak panelling. The floor beneath my feet creaked gently as we crossed the faded, threadbare carpets. A middle-aged woman, who I assumed to be the housekeeper, took my cases and led me up the wide staircase to a narrow, old-fashioned room overlooking the west lawn. The furniture was old and slightly shabby, in the manner befitting an ancient country seat. Everything was either scuffed or chipped, and even the latch on the window was only held closed by a length of frayed ribbon. Crimson once, it had faded to a soft, blushing pink. But the bed was comfortable when I bounced on its springs, and there was a plump eiderdown folded neatly at its foot, should the open fire prove not up to its task. Unpacking my Spartan belongings took no more than 10 minutes. Dresses hung in the closet that had a lingering hint of aged mothballs, hairbrushes on the dressing table, and the small pile of Christmas gifts I had brought on the table beneath the window. I had bought 2 presents, one for my host and one for, perhaps, a wife. I suddenly wondered if there would be children, and I stood at the window listening for clues. The house was giving nothing away. The fire in my room crackled, and a woman's laugh drifted up from the hall, but everything else was silence. At 6 o'clock, a gong sounded, and I descended the wide stairs for drinks. We congregated in the great hall, 4 others and I. After a long, painful wait, I took the bull by the horns and introduced myself. The atmosphere thawed somewhat after all the handshakes and cigarette lighting, but there was the distinct impression that everyone was wary of everyone else. I recognised none of them, not even our host Ambrose Gifford, and had it not been for the look of watchful surprise on each of their faces, I would have assumed my invitation had been a mistake. But it appeared the other guests were strangers too. Even Gifford looked slightly astonished at finding us all there, and it suddenly dawned on me that I might be the butt of some horrible practical joke. Well, I had nothing else to do, so I thought I'd play along. If Gifford were connected to my aunt, then all well and good, and if not, I'd be ready to take the wind out of the prankster's sails. If nothing else, I could dine out on the tale for weeks. Gifford was obviously some sort of military man, though from which war I couldn't tell. He had a distant stare and spoke very little, though when he did, I had the curious sensation that his thoughts were the opposite of what he was saying. He didn't seem the sort that my gently witty aunt would have been friends with, and I dismissed the ridiculous idea of a tragic, forbidden romance that I had been playing with. Next to Gifford stood the Lawtons, Trevor and Beatrice, a married couple from London with abrasive voices and fake vowels. She called him darling, in a tone that rather suggested she'd stopped meaning it some years ago, and he seemed to be constantly suppressing the urge to roll his eyes. They dripped new money, and under different circumstances, I might have thought they were there to put in an offer on Foxcroft Hall. As it was, I didn't think decaying grandeur would meet Beatrice's exacting standards. She wore real pearls and a dress I had admired in a recent edition of Vogue, whereas he wore tweeds that didn't quite match. They were a couple who had descended to the indifference of strangers, and my heart sank somewhat at the thought of spending Christmas with them. The last of our little group was a tall, intense gentleman who introduced himself as Monsieur Vernier. He smoked rapidly and had unpleasant darting eyes. He said almost as little as Mr. Gifford, and I found myself wondering about him. The name may have been French, but the accent, not so much. Conversation was left to the Lawtons and me. It soon became obvious they had no idea why they'd been invited either, as Beatrice tried to hook as much information from the rest of us as she could. It was clear she recognised me from the newspapers, but at least she had the decency not to mention it. We had just finished our sherries when the outer door was flung wide and a battleship of a woman swept in with the wind, cheeks flushed from the cold, and eyes that scanned the room with what I can only describe as appraisal. At last, here was someone I knew, if only by reputation. Minerva Gregory. No, that had been the husband before. It was Minerva Audley now. She was dressed in emerald silk and fur, and had the unmistakable air of a woman who knew things she oughtn't, and not only that, she enjoyed knowing them. Beatrice Lawton stiffened visibly at the sight of her. Perhaps Christmas wasn't going to be dull after all. Supper passed uneventfully. Conversation touched on the weather, the unreliability of modern motor cars, and the delightful rumour that it always snowed at Foxcroft, even when the surrounding villages saw none at all. Gifford gave no hint as to why I'd been invited. I made vague mention of my aunt, but to no avail, though whether that was just from politeness, I couldn't quite tell. After the meal, as we sat by the fire, Mrs. Brindle, the housekeeper, brought in a tray of nuts and sweetmeats. I happened to glance up and caught sight of Brindle's face as she saw Mrs. Audley. Her step faltered and her expression changed. Only slightly, but I saw it. A flicker of something almost too swift to name. Surprise, without doubt, and something else. But what? One emotion was obvious, intense dislike. Brindle said nothing, and Mrs. Audley appeared not to have noticed. It had only been a fleeting moment, faces caught in the firelight, so perhaps I had been mistaken. Outside, the snow began to fall, thin at first, like sifted icing sugar, then heavier, blanketing the gardens and the steep-roofed house with a hush that seemed to grow denser with every flake. The grandfather clock in the hall struck 9. Somewhere, in the depths of the house, a door closed quietly, and I, for reasons I could not quite explain, shivered.